So picture this. You're heading to the courthouse, right?
Yeah.
The place you expect justice, maybe protection.
Uh-huh.
And then suddenly you see plainclothes agents. One might even have a mask on.
Yeah.
And they're detaining people.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think, okay, what happens when the place that's supposed to be about legal process feels like a trap?
Exactly.
Today, we're really going to dive deep into that. We're looking at this complex, often pretty contentious issue of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, doing detentions at courthouses.
Right.
We'll focus a bit on Virginia because there's been some recent stuff there, but we'll also look at how it's playing out, across the country.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we've pulled together quite a bit of material. We're looking at detailed investigations from the ACLU, some really specific local news reports from Virginia, national stuff in the Associated Press, and also, legal commentary from groups like the Brennan Center for Justice and the International Rescue Committee. So a good mix.
Right. So what we're trying to do here is unpack let's say, the legal side, the social side, the political side of these practices. We want to get the different viewpoints and really dig into what these actions mean for access to justice, but for everyone, really. So maybe let's start with what's actually been happening, like on the ground.
Good idea.
Let's look at Virginia, since that's sparked a lot of recent talk. The ACLU of Virginia, for example, they've been investigating ICE detentions down at the Chesterfield County Courthouse. Apparently, multiple people were detained there just this past June.
And that Albemarle County Courthouse incident back on April 22nd this year, that one got a lot of attention.
Right. Tell us about that.
Well, witnesses described seeing two men, Teodoro Dominguez Rodriguez and Pablo Aparicio Marcelino, being detained by these plainclothes officers. And one officer was wearing a balaclava.
A mask. In public like that.
Yeah, and witnesses pointed out that specifically seemed to violate Virginia Code 18.2422, the law about wearing masks in public to hide your identity. It just immediately created this sense of confusion and, frankly, alarm.
Wow. So right away there's confusion. What happened next? Did the agents identify themselves, show warrants?
Well, see, that's where the stories diverge. Witnesses on the scene, and also the chief public defender for Charlottesville and Albemarle County, Nick Rapucci, they reported that the agents didn't show ID or a warrant to the men before arresting them.
Okay.
But then the Albemarle County Sheriff, Chan Bryant, she later stated that the agents had shown ID and warrants to the courthouse bailiffs beforehand.
So real disconnect there between what officials saw versus what the public and the individuals being arrested experienced.
Exactly. A procedural clash, you could say. And ICE, they defended their actions. They even suggested they might prosecute bystanders who, quote, unsuccessfully attempted to obstruct enforcement efforts.
Prosecute bystanders.
Wow.
Okay, so is this just happening in Virginia, or is this like a bigger picture thing?
No, definitely not just Virginia. It's really part of a broader pattern we're seeing nationwide. There's been a sort of flurry of similar incidents lately.
Like what?
Well, you had arrests in North Carolina where the local sheriff was concerned about, lack of communication from ICE. In New Hampshire, there was an incident where agents tackled a man near an elevator, actually knocking down an older man with a cane in the process.
Ooh.
Yeah. And remember that Boston case. A municipal judge actually held an ICE agent in contempt for an arrest in the courtroom. Now, that contempt order was later overturned, but still.
Still, a judge holding an agent in contempt. That's significant.
Hugely significant. And then there was that Wisconsin case just this May. Judge Hannah Dogan was arrested by the FBI.
The FBI? Why?
Allegedly for helping a defendant avoid federal agents who were waiting outside the courtroom. Attorney General Pam Bondi even came out saying the arrest was meant to, quote, send a very strong message.
A message to judges? I mean, that feels like a major escalation.
It really does. It signals this isn't just about enforcement tactics anymore. It's potentially targeting the judiciary itself.
So when you put it all together, the masked agent in Virginia, the judge arrested in Wisconsin, it really highlights this this fundamental clash, doesn't it? Everyone's supposed to have to access the courts versus immigration agents making arrests inside those courts.
Precisely. And that's what people call the chilling effect. The big worry is that just having ICE present, or the fear of ICE being present, stops immigrants from going to court at all.
Which undermines their own cases, obviously.
Right. But it goes beyond that. It affects everyone. Think about victims of crime or witnesses, or people in, say, divorce court or custody battles. If they're scared to show up,
They could lose their case, or worse, not get protection they need.
Exactly. It risks their safety, their legal rights, and legal officials are really concerned. Jim Hingley, the Commonwealth's attorney in Albemarle County, worried about unidentified agents escalating things into violence. And Nick Rapucci, the public defender, warned flat out that this chilling effect makes the community less safe and just. You even had 75 retired judges state back in 2018 that the justice system just can't work if people don't feel safe coming to the courthouse.
75 judges. That's a strong statement. Okay, but what does that chilling effect actually look like on the ground? Like, are certain cases hit harder? What are the real-world consequences?
Well, think about it. A domestic violence survivor needs a protective order, but she's undocumented, or maybe her partner is, and she hears about IC at the courthouse. Does she still go?
Maybe not, which is terrible.
Or a key witness to a robbery. If they're afraid of being detained themselves, they might not testify. That means the case falls apart, crimes go unpunished, trust in the police and the courts, it just erodes.
So it makes solving crimes harder, potentially.
Absolutely. It ripples out, fewer solved crimes, less justice overall. It really helps to understand the history here, too.
Yeah. How do we get here?
Well, for a long time, IC generally followed a policy of not making arrests in what they called sensitive locations. That included schools, hospitals, places of worship, and courthouses.
That seems sensible.
It was considered important for access, but that changed pretty dramatically back at 2017 during the first Trump administration.
Right.
ICE issued a new policy that explicitly allowed courthouse arrests. They focused on, quote, specific targeted aliens and argued it was necessary, especially in so-called sanctuary jurisdictions.
And that led to more arrests.
A definite jump, and a lot of condemnation from judges, lawyers, advocates. Then the Biden administration came in and put restrictions back on those arrests, responding to those concerns.
Okay, so restrictions were back.
For a time. But those were quickly removed when Trump returned to office this year. New guidance came out January 21st, 2025.
And what does that say?
It explicitly allows IC to carry out enforcement in or near courthouses if they think their target will be there. Now, it does say arrests should happen in non-public areas when possible, and agents should try to coordinate with security.
But the green light is basically on again.
Pretty much. And it's really kind of set federal enforcement on this collision course with state court.
A collision court.
Yeah, and what that back and forth really shows is just how unstable this policy area is. It creates massive uncertainty for everyone involved, communities, courts, individuals.
And speaking of collision courses, let's bring it back to Virginia. There was a big move there recently, right? Governor Youngkin's executive order.
Exactly. Executive Order 47, signed February 27th this year. It directly orders Virginia State Police and local jails to assist ICV.
How specifically?
It tells the state police to sign what's called a 287G agreement with ICE. That basically deputizes state troopers to act as immigration agents in certain ways. It also tells the Department of Corrections to make state facilities available for immigration detention.
Wow.
And it requests local sheriffs. It's a request to them to certify they'll give full cooperation to ICE, likely through similar 287G agreements.
So the state is pushing localities towards these 287G agreements. But you said participation is voluntary for the localities.
That's right. Historically, the 287G program has always been opt-in for local jurisdictions. The governor's order puts significant pressure on them, though.
Right. And I imagine that's causing some friction locally. What's the reaction been, say, in Northern Virginia?
Oh, yeah, definitely pushback. Look at Fairfax County. The sheriff's office there is currently reviewing the order, but their existing policy is key. They only honor court-approved warrants.
Meaning signed by a judge.
Correct. Signed by a judge based on probable cause. They don't honor ICE administrative detainers, which are just requests from ICE itself without that judicial review. In fact, Fairfax terminated its 287G agreement back in 2018, partly over constitutional concerns about those detainers.
And they have that trust policy too, right?
They do. Since 2021, it generally bars county employees like police from asking about or sharing citizenship status with ICE unless there's a legal requirement, like a judicial warrant. That policy seems separate from the governor's order, which targets the sheriff and jails more directly, not necessarily all county functions governed by the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so you have Fairfax pushing back. What are the arguments for this increased cooperation that Governor Youngkin is pushing?
Well, proponents like the governor and Attorney General Jason Mears frame it purely as a public safety issue. They argue it's about keeping Virginians safe.
Oh.
They often cite specific criminal cases involving undocumented immigrants to link immigration status and crime, arguing that cooperation is needed to remove dangerous individuals. Governor Youngkin put it very bluntly: dangerous criminal illegal immigrants should not be let back into our communities to assault, rape, and murder.
Strong words. And the counterargument from groups opposing this.
They argued the exact opposite, that this kind of cooperation actually hurts public safety.
How so?
Groups like the ACLU People Power Fairfax, Case of Virginia, and politicians like State Senator Scott Surrevell say it destroys trust between immigrant communities and the police. If people are afraid the local cops are acting like ICE agents, they won't report crimes. They won't be witnesses.
So fewer crimes get solved.
That's the argument. They point to national research suggesting immigrants are actually less likely to commit violent crimes than native-born citizens, and studies finding no link between limiting ICE cooperation and higher crime rates. Luis Aguilar from Case of Virginia even compared 287G agreements to the Fugitive Slave Act's costly, divisive, and often netting people with minor offenses, not hardened criminals. Senator Surrevell called the governor's order a PR stunt that ultimately makes communities less safe.
So deeply divided views on the impact.
Absolutely. And, in this environment, you see groups like the ACLU really trying to step up. The ACLU of Virginia launched a dedicated immigrants' rights project just last August.
Why now? Or why the focus?
Well, they noted Virginia's immigrant population has exploded, more than tripled in 30 years, over 1 million people now. So the need is huge. Their goals are pretty broad: find and fix civil rights violations, shine a light on conditions inside Virginia's 2 ICE detention centers, Farmville and Caroline, and just educate the public about how local police are or aren't working with ICE.
How are they doing that?
Through lawsuits, policy work, community organizing, working directly with immigrants. Their very first lawsuit, filed the day the project launched, actually went after the ICE Washington field office.
About what?
For holding on to people even after they'd been granted humanitarian relief, which the ACLU argued goes against ICE's own stated policies.
Interesting. And all of this, the courthouse arrests, the 287G debate, the lawsuits, it really brings us back to something fundamental, doesn't it? Due process.
Absolutely fundamental. It's easy to forget, but the Constitution guarantees certain rights to everyone in the U.S., regardless of their immigration status. That includes the right to fair treatment, fair hearings, especially when your freedom is on the line.
And the Supreme Court has backed this up.
Repeatedly. Affirmed that core due process rights extend to everyone within our borders. And the importance of a fair hearing in immigration cases?
Wow.
It's immense. One former immigration judge famously described them as like death penalty cases in a traffic court setting.
Wow. Death penalty cases in a traffic court setting. That paints a picture. Why that analogy?
Because the stakes are incredibly high, deportation can mean separation from family, return to persecution, essentially the death of the life someone has built here. But the process itself can feel rushed, under-resourced, like a lower-level court.
Which makes having a lawyer crucial, I imagine.
Absolutely critical. Immigration law is notoriously complex. The statistics show people with lawyers are 5 times more likely to actually win their case and get the status they're eligible for.
5 times? That's huge.
It is. But here's the catch. Unlike in criminal court, the government is not required to provide you with a lawyer in immigration proceedings.
So if you can't afford one.
You're often on your own, even children, trying to navigate this incredibly complicated system alone.
That seems almost impossible.
Yeah.
Given all that, what are some basic rights people should know, especially if they encounter ICE?
Yeah, the ACLU and others have good know your rights guidance. Some key things. If you're stopped, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer questions about where you were born, how you entered the country, etc.
Okay, remain silent. What else?
Don't lie. Lying can cause more problems. Don't sign anything without talking to a lawyer. And don't consent to searches of yourself or your belongings without a warrant or probable cause.
What about papers?
If you're over 18 and not a citizen, you are technically required to carry your immigration documents with you, so have them if you have them.
What if ICE comes to your home?
Don't open the door just because they knock. Ask them to show you a warrant signed by a judge. An ICE administrative warrant isn't enough to force entry into your home. You can state clearly through the door, I do not consent to your entry.
And if you are arrested?
Ask for a lawyer immediately. Say, I want to speak to a lawyer. If it's police arresting you for a crime, you might get a public defender. If it's ICE, they won't provide one, but you should ask for a list of free or low-cost legal services.
Okay.
Remember your alien registration number, or A number if you have one. And crucially, if you fear being persecuted or tortured if sent back to your home country, tell the officers immediately. Claiming asylum is a right.
That's really vital information. So given this whole situation, this collision course you mentioned, what can states do if they want to protect access to their courts?
Well, states aren't powerless. They have some tools. One big one is requiring judicially authorized warrants for arrests inside state courthouses.
Like we talked about with Fairfax, focusing on warrants signed by judges, not just IC administrative ones.
Exactly. States can pass court rules or even legislation saying IC needs that judicial sign-off to make an arrest inside a state courthouse. Some did this during the first Trump term.
What else?
They can prohibit state court personnel, bailiffs, clerks, from actively helping IC. That means not giving them non-public information, not coordinating arrests.
Yeah.
Courts can also just establish really clear internal policies, like who's in charge when IC shows up, what are the steps, so court staff aren't caught flat-footed making tough decisions on the spot.
Makes sense. Planning ed.
Yeah. And finally, something we saw accelerate during the pandemic, expanding remote court proceedings. If people can appear virtually for certain hearings, it might help them access justice without fearing an in-person encounter at the courthouse.
So some concrete steps states and courts could take.
Definitely.
Okay, so wrapping this up.
Yeah.
What this deep dive really shows is this this constant friction, right, between the push for immigration enforcement and these really fundamental rights and civil liberties. And this whole debate over courthouse detentions, it's not just about immigration policy, is it? It hits at the core of our justice system. Like, can everyone, truly everyone, feel safe enough to even walk through the courthouse doors?
That's the crux of it. And it leaves you thinking, how do these policies and the reactions to them, how do they actually shape the trust or mistrust between communities and the institutions that are supposed to serve them? You know, how does that constant push and pull between federal power and state or local authority play out where you live? What does it mean for the rights of everyone in your community? It's a really critical thing to keep considering as we watch these dynamics unfold.
Definitely something to keep thinking about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.